On this episode of the podcast, I have with me Amir Nathoo. He is the co-founder and head of Outschool. We're going to be talking about who Outschool is, what they do. We're going to be talking about education, how the platform has actually extended people who can become educators that you wouldn't typically think of as a stereotypical educator, and all this expertise out there that Outschool has tapped into to help kids learn and adults learn. And we're going to see if we can get into a few other topics, regarding AI, maybe. It just depends how far we get with it, Amir. So, Amir, thanks for being on the show. Thanks for taking the time.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. Looking forward to the conversation.
Absolutely. All right. Before we start, can you tell everyone what Outschool does?
So Outschool provides a marketplace of live online classes for kids. So these are classes that can be taken by kids anywhere in the world and offered by teachers on an online platform based on Zoom. So these are classes that meet live, typically between 3 and 5 students. Their classes go up to 12, or they're one-on-one. And because it's a marketplace, teachers are free to be creative and teach the classes that they've always wanted to teach in the way they wanted to teach it. And what that means is we have everything from like the standard core subjects that you might expect, math and English and science and social studies, all the way through to the kinds of enrichment that are difficult to find, or maybe you can't even possibly imagine. Like we have teachers teaching math through art, or English through Minecraft, doing combinations of creative subjects that you can imagine. And we've got teachers doing things online, which you might be surprised about. Like we have group music classes with piano and guitar that actually work online and work very, very, very well. So families come to us and use these classes to supplement their kids' education, or even use it as an alternative to traditional schooling.
Very cool. I think I mentioned to you before we started recording that my daughter learned sign language, and I was blown away at the expertise that she was, seeing. And we were kind of talking to the teacher, and she was with a group of a few other kids. And I mean, she learned so much in so little time, and it just really got me thinking about this. And Outschool's been around for a while. It's not a brand new company. You guys have been around for a couple of years, correct?
Yeah, that's right. We founded in 2015 and launched in 2017.
I guess, just first thing, because I'm always curious when people start seeing a community early and something like this where it is trying to promote other forms of education, right? Non-traditional and not inside the classroom. And I'll let you maybe clarify my terminology if I'm speaking to this incorrectly. But how did you see that gap? Because you guys started a while ago. It's almost a decade. And obviously it's become very popular for kids right now. But that gap initially, where did it come about?
Yeah, that's a great question. And, we've now served over 1 million learners. So, both our model of learning and just the general idea of online learning and supplemental learning for sure are growing. But there are a few things that point me to the gap and the opportunity to start with. One of them was just the opportunity and growth in marketplace models in other domains. For example, in vacation rentals with Airbnb, or with booking a car, a taxi with Lyft and Uber, or even like Lyft Line and Uber Pool. The idea that you could use marketplace-like models to radically increase convenience and supply and transform the structure of an industry was super interesting to me. But that hadn't happened in education. A lot of the innovation in education was focused on innovating within the context of the system itself. Whereas to me, I started to come to the hypothesis that more systemic change was needed to address some of the well-known issues and challenges that there are in education. So that model was interesting as a means to drive systemic change. And then there was a lot of kind of personal insight and motivation coming from my own journey, and realizing, one of the motivations for me personally was I wanted to have kids. I didn't have kids yet in 2015. I ran the company, but now I have, a 5-year-old and a 3-year-old. And that got me reflecting on my own education and what I wanted for them. And I started to realize, wow, there's a few things coming out of that set of thinking. One of them was that I wanted something different from my kids than I received, because based on everything I'd seen changing in the world in my professional life, I grew up through the internet. I didn't have the internet as a kid. In college, even, people barely had mobile phones when I was going through college. So I lived through this transition. I've seen that transition transform work and technology. And I realized, oh, wow, like education hasn't changed that much since I went through it. But what I think is important for kids to learn how they could or should learn has changed. And so I realized that it was likely, if I had these thoughts and I'd put time to thinking about them as an entrepreneur technologist, it was likely that a lot of other parents, a lot of other people my age who are going to have young kids were going to have the same doubts about the applicability of the existing kind of education system in the modern world. So all those were kind of influences and drivers, and also then the reflection about how much I have learned outside of the regular school context, especially with the help of my parents, who both happen to be teachers, and how much they did for me outside of the walls of the classroom in terms of pursuing interests and supporting me in my schoolwork, and realizing, that when you think about education, you shouldn't just be constrained by what happens in school. There's so much more that's possible, and that led me to where we are now, and this realization that there was this gap that other people were not seeing.
I guess been around since 2015. If we were to jump a few years early, obviously you guys saw remote learning early. The pandemic must have brought a different level of attention and spotlight to the opportunity to learn remotely for maybe people that previously would have just assumed you have to take a child or you have to learn within a classroom setting. With the pandemic, which was trying for most parents, that opportunity for Outschool to be an alternative platform to learn, can you maybe talk to us a little bit about how obviously that might have validated your core thesis of remote learning is possible, but then all of a sudden that demand must have been a tremendous push for the company.
Absolutely. We were growing nicely and, had built an initial product and achieved product market fit, especially within the secular homeschooling community, and we're broadening out in 2019. And then 2020 hit and obviously took everyone by complete surprise. But, for a while there, it was a matter of keeping the train on track, just in terms of coping with the growth. And from a family perspective, that's what families were doing, just trying to survive. And along those lines, our business grew 20x, 20 times in 2020 alone. And at our scale, I don't know any other company that has experienced that kind of one-time growth. And that acted to increase the profile of Outschool, make people more aware of alternatives in their kids' education, opportunities to supplement both Outschool and others, and also completely change the landscape in terms of people's understanding of online learning. For better or worse, there were many people who had a terrible experience with online learning that was provided by their schools because they were not outfitted to it. That's why many of them turned to Outschool, because we were experienced at offering this kind of learning and were able to scale effectively and provide good learning experiences through that time. In terms of where that fits with the kind of broader change in the education system, I think, one thing that's changed is before the pandemic, it was like, we've really picked a hard problem here. We're going to try and change the system with a marketplace-based approach. And we were going to offer this new learning mode that's based on these live online classes. Has all these benefits, but it's very, very new on multiple fronts. Now, post-pandemic, I never have to, and so you had to explain multiple things to people to get them kind of over the line of thinking, this is why it's useful, this is why it's good. Now, no one kind of has questions about online learning anymore. They know what it is. They might have concerns, or they might want it in a particular way, but the idea of using these kind of modes, these learning modes for education, there's much greater awareness amongst customers. I think the piece that is still emerging, but it's starting to emerge more and more, especially with the challenges in the regular education system, is what does this enable? When you start to realize that you don't have to learn math with a local tutor or just with a local group. You could get a teacher who is a better fit for your kid, a learning group. It's better fit for your kid not locally. You don't have to be constrained by that anymore. And similarly, you don't have to be constrained by the curriculum choices within your school district. There's just a wealth of human knowledge available in the marketplace. People are starting to grapple and realizing, oh, so much of the behavior, I think, in education has been unconsciously driven by these constraints that were just like necessary with how education has worked in the past, and they're no longer there. And so I think a transformation needs to happen in how people approach kids' learning to recognize that they don't have to follow the standard path. In fact, there is no standard path anymore. That, what's needed for the future is tremendous diversity in education, so you can allow your child to pursue unique paths that fit their unique needs and opportunities and potential. And we don't have to be constrained by this one-size-fits-all system. That is a radical proposition, a radical system change that I think needs to happen and will happen. You can see it happening, but that's still to come.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the one thing that I think is interesting, I'd love to hear your thoughts, is obviously we are seeing a shift in people talking about the way they talk about education. They're challenging the notion of the 4-year degrees post-education, in university, college. We're challenging the notion of what the pandemic showed us in terms of how kids can learn, where they fall behind, the kind of attention they need. When it comes to maybe thinking about, you mentioned, education is slow to evolve, and obviously there's very defined structures within the system. An Outschool type company that's coming along and providing either alternative education, you mentioned homeschool, different supplementary type of resources. When you think about the child and the child getting more hands-on time and getting more attention per kid, and that's a big challenge, especially in the public school system, is the amount of time you get with the teacher. Have you guys seen the impact on students going through Outschool? Have you guys been able to track those kind of metrics?
Absolutely, we see the impact, but the signals we gather are primarily qualitative, and here's why. Because when you're providing such a broad marketplace as Outschool, we don't base assessments of our marketplace as a whole based on standardized tests, because we're not offering a constrained curriculum. We have teachers offering such a wide variety of subjects, some with more academic, some less academic, some with grades and homework and tests, and others not. So when you're dealing with a marketplace like that, and different outcomes of the promised for different classes, so when you're dealing with a marketplace like that, it's hard to come up with a singular unifying metric. And the one that we do focus on is parent and student satisfaction, because ultimately, that is a core driver, and we believe that they are best placed to judge whether they have achieved their goals through the use of classes. And you'll note that it's surprising from a business perspective, customer satisfaction seems like an obvious thing to track, but you don't hear about that very much when you talk about measurement of the school system. You hear a lot about standards, you hear a lot about tests, you hear a lot about teacher training and all of that. And I think it just goes to show how not customer-centric our existing system is. But then qualitatively, we have people writing and saying that Outschool has changed their lives, that their kid has gone from hating math to loving math and being 2 grades ahead. And what it took wasn't some amazing teacher. Our teachers are amazing, but it wasn't just that. It wasn't like, oh, we picked the right curriculum. It's just about fit. It's just about attention and fit, and having like a caring adult who's really paying attention to that kid, whether one-on-one or in a group. And sometimes in a school, it's not necessarily like the teacher in the school is bad or anything. It's just that there's a larger class, or for whatever reason, the student doesn't jive with the teacher. And then historically, if you think about it, there's this immense tragedy. Imagine you're a kid in a school who would otherwise be talented at math, but for whatever reason, you just find this teacher not motivating to you, or the circumstance of the classroom does not conducive. And so you don't do well at some standardized tests, and then you live your life thinking, oh, I guess I'm just bad at math. Well, that is, to me, is nonsensical. We didn't separate the variables there at all. We didn't try another teacher or a different learning environment. But now, with what we offer, with the tremendous variety offer, suddenly allow families to do that experimentation. Well, hey, you think you're not doing well at math? Well, why don't you try a different way of getting to math? Not with this curriculum, or with a different teacher, or with a different learning group. And we can run those tests. So it's before you force kids to say, oh, to develop this self-identity of, oh, I'm good at this and bad at that. Well, let's run some tests here. It's madness that we're giving, telling these kids that, and having them form these identities so judgmentally and so rapidly without the appropriate diligence in the current system.
And it makes a lot of sense about the satisfaction component. And it's very interesting because you were, as you were speaking, I was thinking about how a lot of public schools are standards driven. Obviously, it's a big, wide standard across school districts, counties, the state, and it is hard because obviously they're seeing a variety of demographics. When it comes to that standard, right? Obviously, when you're providing a marketplace, you do see different providers that could provide a different fit. And I think you touched on this, and I think this is maybe what was interesting to me, is that the kid that potentially might struggle in math, and I don't know, maybe you guys do this, but is there a way of working with school systems so that the kid that is potentially just not jiving or just not picking up the way it's being taught in school can be pushed into, hey, have you thought about this? And then maybe it's not just Outschool, other programs, so that they don't fall behind. Because it seems like, as you just said, it's a little nonsensical for a kid to kind of slip through the cracks if we already see their scores dropping. It's not very hard. We can identify that child. And maybe it's a supplemental education, and maybe it's a cost thing, maybe it's not. I don't know. But is there an opportunity to kind of extend and work with those type of opportunities to make sure that we don't have that child that just doesn't understand the way that, that teacher's teaching them?
Absolutely. I think that's the future, where there's strong partnerships between school systems around the world and platforms like Outschool, where it's much more like a ecosystem of teachers and institutions serving a kid's needs, the right intervention at the right points, the right handoff and tight handoff. Like right now, the parent's kind of the integration point, right? If they feel like their child is not getting what they need in school, they've got to go and come to platforms like Outschool or try and get the help that they need outside of the system. And be much better to have an integrated ecosystem. I think it'll just take a while to get there. And there's challenges in the school system, and that have to be resolved from a budgetary perspective. At times from a political perspective, with kind of fights that happen with some school boards. And that means that it'll be slow. It'll happen. It needs to happen for the sake of our kids, but it'll be slow. And that's why, as a platform, we're primarily focused on going direct to parents as our main vector of growth right now. Because parents, especially those who have the strongest needs, that are feeling most dissatisfied with the existing school system, so who are secular homeschoolers or have neurodivergent or gifted kids, or kids with special needs, many of them come to Outschool, or where they're parents who identify specific gaps that they're mostly happy with their schooling, but maybe there's like a enrichment class that the school doesn't offer or can't offer, or there's a particular subject they want to provide their kid extra help in, they come to us. So right now it's parents as the integration point, but you're absolutely right. It'd be much, much better to have the system be integrated.
Yeah, it's interesting because obviously, when you don't know enough about education, ideas are like, oh, this would be easy to do, and that would be easy to do. You're within the world, and sometimes I guess I just wonder, like within a county, maybe there is a teacher that teaches math for third grade the best, has the right style. You've shown that you can have a platform to distribute education. Is it that big of a leap to go, you know what, per county, we're going to take our best curriculum, our best teachers, we're going to record it? It's not like the lessons vary from third grade math from one year to the next year. I don't think a lot shifts. I mean, textbooks get used for a decade, probably teaching the same concepts. But is there an opportunity to find the best way that a child learns, match them up with that provider? And obviously, this is maybe talking a little bit off your platform, maybe more general education, but still, your platform is showing us that it's doable.
Totally. I think there's two core challenges here, which is why it hasn't happened actually yet. One of those challenges is that when you say best, The problem is that best for one kid is not the best for the other. So it has to be personalized and customized. You can't just get like the star teacher and like that should be everyone in the world's math teacher, because what's the best for one kid is not the best for the other. One challenge. A second challenge is it's not just about the content and the instruction. Education is mostly an engagement game, because unless the child is engaged, the instruction is worthless. And those two challenges are ones that the education system and a lot of ed tech has not sufficiently grappled with. Because if those challenges didn't exist, or we'd succeeded in grappling with them, then Sal Khan would have succeeded in solving all of the math problems in the world. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not throwing stones at Sal. Like, he's had an incredible impact in education. It's amazing that he's made available all this content for free. But I think what that's shown is not just about making the content from a great teacher available for free. There's a lot more challenge in education. And so that's why the live instruction component increases kids' engagement. So even if the curriculum can be kind of recorded or centrally provided, like having a human audience or having an accountability partner, whatever you want to call it, but that in-person or live instruction is critical for engagement, and that personalization is key. And that's why people are so interested in AI, because the thought then is okay, well, how far can AI go in addressing the two issues that I just outlined, like the personalization for the individual kids' needs and the engagement? And I'm really interested. I think there's so much that's happening. There's so much opportunity, and we're going to be leaning into it heavily with Outschool. I think the personalization piece is particularly interesting for AI, because if they can know you and your level well and the content well, then the personalization becomes a lot more tractable than it has in the past. I think the engagement piece, I think, is the key piece that still is a question mark. And we see a future where AI for personalization in conjunction with the human element for engagement could be like a really powerful combo in addressing those core issues in education.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because I think my next question, based on the hypothetical, how come we can't bring the best, was the AI piece. And I guess as you're looking at the AI piece, and you mentioned it could potentially start addressing the personalization per child, more importantly, you said obviously every child does learn differently, and then you do need that human element. As you're looking at the flip side to AI, and you're starting to see children leverage AI in their work and their homework, go ask ChatGPT or an LLM to do this, that, and the other. As an educational platform, you guys might be a little bit less susceptible to this. I'm not sure, but how does the educational system deal with the fact that there is an alternative form to ask questions and get answers and circumvent some of the work that should be done? I grew up in a time very similar to you that didn't exist. We had to do it the hard way. But I hear every so often my daughter will call out to Alexa and ask a question. I go, oh, don't do that, because we're going to have to unplug this darn thing pretty soon.
I mean, you've highlighted a really interesting point. I think different uses of AI in education, it's not uniform that they're good, quote unquote good, taking some judgment of what education is for. But I think what the uses in AI in education highlight is how important this engagement thing is. Because there's one use of AI in education to make homework easier, because I'm just jumping through hoops. I'm not here to learn. The system has taught me. I just need to get the grade in order to move through it. And there's another use, which is, this is a really helpful tool, like an encyclopedia or a search engine, which should be used and can be used to help me achieve my educational goals. And I think that difference in use cases just makes this engagement problem all the more severe. If a child is not motivated to learn, thinks they're just jumping through hoops, then AI is not going to be used productively in an educational context. If a child is engaged, understands how education could help them achieve what's important to them, is meaningful for them, then they'll use AI in productive ways. And you can try and enforce and have these rules, it won't work. And this again points the only thing in education that's important is really the engagement, the love of learning. And until systems and institutions start really internalizing that and recognizing that, you're going to have these, frankly, dull and boring. Oh, like, how do we restrict the use of AI? Oh, isn't it terrible? Like, our youth are, it's not like in our days, our youth are, using it to cheat. I mean, we've got to shut up about that. Like, we're the adults here building the system, or having inherited the system. We better change it so that it works for our kids, and stop blaming them for systems that make it seem like education is about jumping through hoops, not really about learning, just about getting the credential. We've set the system up. We've created the game. We're the adults here. Like, and we need to understand that these results are our doing. And so, I'll get on my I'll get on my foghorn again and say, we need to change the system here. And until we actually change the system in a way that's future-proof, we're going to run into a whole host of issues, whether it's in AI or in equity or in a host of other areas.
Yeah, I love the phrase used, the love of learning. And I think, as I'm listening to you, the purpose behind Outschool, I can hear that there was not just the greater good, but trying to help people establish that level of learning. And I think it's really interesting because I don't know if that's talked about enough. I don't think kids hear that enough. I think as parents, sometimes we over-index on grades, on scores, have you studied? And we forget that once you're done with school and you go to the real world, it's how do you learn and prepare for job number 2? That's critical. And no one's really done a whole lot to teach you how to go do that self-learning throughout multiple phases of education. So I think that's quite interesting. I hadn't really thought about that.
Yeah, it's challenging. It's talking about a societal shift in our attitudes towards education. It's going to be hard to do, but necessary. And I think will happen because as AI develops and as the future changes more and more rapidly, it becomes more and more obvious how our existing systems are not serving us. And actually, it doesn't just apply to education. There's many systems we're seeing in the world right now where there is a moment of realization that this is not the way things should work in the future. And so education is part of that, and will change.
Awesome, Amir. I appreciate you coming on, chatting with us. If somebody wants to learn more about Outschool, what's a good way for them to learn more?
Come to our website, outschool.com. You can sign up for free and browse our classes and decide if there's sit with your learner and see if there's something that inspires them. We'd love to have you.
Awesome. We'll definitely include that in the show notes. Again, thanks for being on the show. That's it for this episode. Be back again, different guests, different topic. Until then, 2 things. 1, I love this conversation. I love, I think Amir left at the end the love of learning. And I, as a parent, need to remember that my number 1 job with my child is to make sure she really enjoys that process. And sometimes we forget about that. But also, Amir talked a lot about some of the core benefits, differences of being remote, learning within a different type of environment, the impact of AI, lots of different things. I'm sure somebody else will benefit from listening from this. Please share this with somebody else who might enjoy the conversation. Also, like, subscribe, comment, let me know how the podcast is going. Until next time, thank you and goodbye.